Living with a narcissist sister. The double standard that almost broke me. Imagine this. Your sister doesn't respond to your texts for days, maybe weeks, radio silence. But if you don't text her back within an hour, she's furious. She's calling you out. She's making you the villain. She cancels plans constantly and expects everyone to understand. But if you cancel once, she holds a grudge for months. She gives unsolicited advice about everyone's life, speaks for other people, makes decisions for them. But if you dare offer her even the gentlest constructive criticism, she explodes. This is the story of a woman living with her sister's double standards. A sister who has one set of rules for everyone else and a completely different set for herself. A sister who might just be a textbook narcissist. And the question at the heart of this story: how do you love someone who refuses to extend you even a fraction of the grace they demand for themselves? Let's start with the most basic form of respect in any relationship: communication. Our storyteller, let's call her Rachel, has a sister. Let's call her Michelle. Michelle doesn't respond to texts, doesn't return calls. You can reach out to her and she'll just ignore you for days, sometimes longer. But here's the catch: if you don't respond to Michelle immediately, she's furious. Not mildly annoyed, not slightly hurt. Furious. She'll call you out, make it an issue. Make you the bad guy for doing exactly what she does to everyone else constantly. This is the foundation of Michelle's world: rules for thee, but not for me. Rachel gives us another example. Someone emails Michelle about a job, a professional opportunity, something important. Michelle doesn't check her email, just doesn't bother. And when the opportunity falls through, Michelle's response is, "They should have texted me." No, Michelle needs to check her email. That's what adults do. That's what professionals do. But Michelle has decided that everyone else needs to reach out to her on all avenues: email, text, voicemail, maybe carrier pigeon, while she herself checks none of them. And when things don't work out because of her failure to communicate, she blames everyone else. The world must bend to Michelle's convenience. Michelle will not adjust 1 inch to meet the world halfway. Michelle comments on everything: everyone's choices, everyone's lives, everyone's decisions. She has opinions about how you should parent your kids, run your business, dress yourself, spend your money. She shares these opinions freely, constantly, without invitation. But if you dare offer Michelle even the gentlest piece of constructive criticism, she gets angry, actually angry. You've crossed a line, you've attacked her, you've failed to understand her. Rachel says, you can never ever give her any type of constructive criticism or she gets angry. Michelle can dissect your entire life, but her own life is sacred ground. Off limits, beyond reproach. This isn't just sensitivity, this is a belief system. Michelle genuinely believes her right to critique others is absolute, while others' right to critique her is non-existent. Here's where it gets really insidious. Rachel gives a perfect example. She wants to go somewhere. Her husband doesn't want to go. Before Rachel can even discuss it with her husband, before they can figure it out as a couple, Michelle jumps in. Leave him alone, he doesn't want to go. Michelle speaks for Rachel's husband, makes decisions for him, acts as his spokesperson without being asked. Michelle does this to their mother too, makes proclamations about what their father does or doesn't want, interprets everyone's feelings and desires without consulting them. But if Rachel or anyone else tries to speak for someone, even accurately, even helpfully, Michelle loses it. How dare you presume to know what someone else is thinking? How dare you speak for them? The hypocrisy isn't just present, it's aggressive, it's constant. Michelle has decided she's the only person qualified to interpret and communicate others' thoughts and feelings. Everyone else needs to stay in their lane. Michelle has feelings, big feelings, and those feelings must be honored at all times. She can cry whenever she wants, and when she cries, everyone must stop, comfort her, adjust to her emotional state. But if Rachel cries, if their mother gets upset, if anyone else in the family shows emotion, Michelle gets angry, not sympathetic, not concerned, angry. Their feelings are inconvenient, their emotions are manipulative, their tears are something to be annoyed by, not comforted. Rachel says if they get angry with Michelle, Michelle's response is, "You choose to be angry." Let that sink in. Michelle's emotions are valid, automatic, and must be accommodated. Everyone else's emotions are choices. Choices Michelle judges them for making. This is gaslighting at its finest. Your feelings aren't real feelings. They're choices you're making to be difficult, to attack Michelle, to fail to understand her. Michelle cancels plans constantly. You make arrangements, you clear your schedule, you're ready to go, and Michelle cancels last minute. No real reason, just can't make it. And everyone is supposed to understand. Of course, Michelle can't make it. She's busy. She's overwhelmed. She's dealing with things. You need to be flexible. You need to be accommodating. That's what family does. But if you cancel on Michelle once, if something comes up and you have to reschedule, she doesn't give you that same understanding. Not even close. She remembers. She holds on to it. She brings it up later. You're unreliable. You don't prioritize her. You don't care enough. The double standard is so blatant it would be almost funny if it weren't so exhausting. Michelle's time is precious. Yours is expendable. Michelle's schedule is sacred. Yours is negotiable. Michelle's reasons for canceling are always valid. Yours are always excuses. But here's what Rachel finds particularly insufferable. And honestly, this example reveals everything. Someone offers to do Michelle a favor, drive her somewhere, help her out. Rachel volunteers to drive. She's being kind, helpful, generous with her time. They're going somewhere and Rachel takes a slightly longer route. Maybe she wasn't paying attention to the GPS for a moment. It adds maybe 15-20 minutes, not an hour, not a catastrophic delay, 15 to 20 minutes, and Michelle cannot let it go. I should have driven. I need to get home. This is taking forever. She's moaning, groaning, moving around in her seat dramatically. Acting like this minor inconvenience is the worst thing that's ever happened to her. Rachel is doing Michelle a favor, using her gas, her time, her car. And Michelle is complaining the entire time about an extra 15 minutes. This is narcissism in action. Michelle's mild discomfort matters more than Rachel's entire act of service. The favor doesn't count. The effort doesn't register. Only Michelle's experience matters. Only Michelle's time matters. Only Michelle's inconvenience matters. Michelle has a catchphrase for anyone who doesn't immediately understand her, agree with her, or accommodate her. They're different. They don't understand me. Everyone is wrong. Everyone is different. Everyone fails to understand poor, misunderstood Michelle. It's never Michelle who needs to adjust. It's never Michelle who's being unreasonable. It's always everyone else who's different, wrong, or incapable of understanding her unique and special perspective. This is textbook narcissistic victimhood. The narcissist is simultaneously superior to everyone. Only I understand things correctly and perpetually victimized by everyone. Nobody understands me. Michelle never seems to like anyone, Rachel says, because nobody meets her standards. Nobody treats her exactly the way she demands to be treated. And because Michelle's standards only apply to others, never to herself, nobody can meet them. Is this narcissism? Rachel asks, is this part of being the narcissist? Let me answer that clearly, yes. This is textbook narcissistic behavior. Here are the markers. 1. Different rules for self versus others. The narcissist can do things others can't. The same behavior that's unacceptable from others is perfectly fine when they do it. 2. Complete lack of empathy. Michelle gets angry when others show emotion. She cannot or will not put herself in others' shoes. Only her feelings matter. 3. Inability to accept criticism. Any feedback, no matter how gentle, is experienced as an attack. The narcissist's self-image must be protected at all costs. 4. Chronic victimhood. Michelle is always misunderstood, always wronged, always the victim of others' failure to accommodate her. 5. Entitlement. Michelle expects others to check multiple communication channels to reach her while she checks none. She expects others to always understand when she cancels while giving no understanding when others cancel. Her needs are paramount. 6. Lack of gratitude. When someone does her a favor, like driving her somewhere, Michelle can only focus on how it wasn't done exactly to her specifications. 7. Projection. You choose to be angry is projection. Michelle can't acknowledge that her behavior causes legitimate hurt, so she reframes others' reactions as choices they're making to be difficult. 8. Emotional manipulation. Michelle can cry freely and expects comfort. Others' tears are met with anger. This trains everyone around her to manage her emotions while suppressing their own. This isn't just difficult personality traits. This is a consistent pattern of narcissistic behavior. Here's what people who haven't dealt with a narcissistic family member don't understand. It's exhausting. Every interaction requires you to manage their emotions while suppressing your own, follow rules they don't follow, accept criticism you can't give, provide understanding you won't receive, walk on eggshells to avoid triggering their rage, watch them do exactly what they punished you for doing. You're constantly performing emotional calculus. Is it worth bringing this up? Will this set her off? Should I just let it go? How can I phrase this so she doesn't explode? You start minimizing your own needs, questioning your own perceptions, wondering if maybe you are too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult. That's what narcissists do. They make you doubt your own reality. Rachel is living in a perpetual state of accommodation. She accommodates Michelle's communication style, her emotional volatility, her double standards, her criticism, her cancellations, her ingratitude. And Michelle accommodates. Nothing, no one, ever. Here's the hard truth Rachel needs to hear. Michelle will not change. Narcissists don't change because narcissists don't believe they need to change. The problem is always everyone else. Michelle genuinely believes she has a right to ignore texts but deserves immediate responses. She can critique others but shouldn't be critiqued. She can speak for others but others can't speak for anyone. Her emotions are valid, but others are choices. She can cancel plans, but others shouldn't. She can complain about favors she didn't have to accept. She believes all of this deeply. Fundamentally, it's not an act. It's her reality, and because it's her reality, she has no motivation to change it. Why would she? The current system works perfectly for Michelle. She gets to do whatever she wants and everyone else adjusts. She gets to be the center of attention, the perpetual victim, the arbiter of all rules. Change would require Michelle to acknowledge she's being unfair, develop empathy for others, accept responsibility for her behavior, feel genuine remorse for hurting people, make sustained effort to treat others better. Narcissists can't do this, or won't. The end result is the same. Rachel can't change Michelle, but Rachel can change how she responds to Michelle. Here's what that looks like. Stop following rules Michelle doesn't follow. If Michelle doesn't respond to texts promptly, Rachel doesn't need to either. Match the energy, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Stop accepting criticism from someone who can't receive it. When Michelle critiques Rachel's life, Rachel can say, "I'm not interested in your opinion on this," and then not engage further. Stop doing favors for someone who won't appreciate them. No more driving Michelle places, no more going out of your way. If Michelle can complain about a 15-minute delay, she can find her own ride. Name the double standard. When Michelle speaks for Rachel's husband, then gets mad when Rachel does the same, Rachel can say, "You just did that exact thing 5 minutes ago. Why is it okay when you do it but not when I do?" Set consequences. "If you cancel our plans again, I won't make plans with you anymore." Then follow through. Stop managing Michelle's emotions. When Michelle cries, Rachel doesn't have to drop everything to comfort her. When Michelle gets angry, Rachel can leave the room. Michelle's emotions are Michelle's responsibility. Limit contact. This is the hard one. But sometimes the only way to preserve your sanity is to reduce exposure to the toxic person. Rachel asks if this is part of being a narcissist. Yes, Rachel, this is exactly what narcissism looks like in action. The double standards, the lack of empathy, the inability to accept criticism, the constant victimhood, the entitlement, the emotional manipulation, all of it. And here's what Rachel needs to understand. None of this is her fault. She didn't cause Michelle's narcissism. She can't fix it, and she doesn't have to tolerate it. Loving a narcissist doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean following rules they don't follow. It doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being to manage their emotions. Rachel can love her sister from a distance. She can set boundaries. She can refuse to participate in the double standard dance. Because the only person Rachel can control is Rachel. And Rachel deserves better than to spend her life accommodating someone who will never, ever accommodate her back. So I want to ask you, have you dealt with someone like Michelle? Someone who has completely different rules for themselves than for everyone else. Someone who expects you to manage their emotions while dismissing yours. Someone who can dish out criticism but can't take even the gentlest feedback. How did you handle it? Did you set boundaries? Did you limit contact? Did you find a way to maintain the relationship without losing yourself? Let me know in the comments. And if you're currently dealing with a narcissistic family member, know this: you're not crazy, you're not too sensitive, you're not imagining the double standards. You're just dealing with someone who will never play by the same rules they expect everyone else to follow. And that's not your failure, it's theirs. Story 2, from daddy to just a guy. Watching your hero become your nightmare. You're a little kid. 5, maybe 6 years old. Your father has to leave for work early in the morning. He'll be gone for 3 months. And you cry, you sob, you beg him not to go because he's your hero, your daddy, the person you love most in the world. Fast forward 17 years. That same man is threatening to harm himself if you say you'd prefer your parents were divorced. He's drunk, trying to pee in bushes outside Walmart. He's screaming at you for studying too long instead of buying him beer. He's assaulting your mother while you stand there helpless. And you realize the man you called daddy doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. This is the story of a 23-year-old watching their father disintegrate. A story about the unbearable grief of losing a parent who's still alive. And the impossible question: how do you mourn someone who's standing right in front of you? Our storyteller, let's call him Daniel, is 23 years old now. The youngest of 2 kids, he has an older sister. When Daniel was little, his father was everything a kid could want in a dad. Funny, charming, the kind of guy everybody loved, the kind of dad who lights up a room, who makes you feel special, who makes you feel safe. Daniel's father worked away from home, 3 months at a time. Long stretches where Daniel wouldn't see him. And when his father had to leave early in the morning for one of those trips, Daniel would cry. Not just cry, sob, beg him to stay. Because 3 months felt like forever when you were little and your daddy was your whole world. That's the father Daniel remembers. That's the man who lived in his memory for years. Funny, charming, beloved, gone for work but desperately missed. The kind of father a child holds onto in their heart during those long 3-month absences. That was Daddy, but time passed, and Daddy started to change. Daniel doesn't say exactly when it started. These things never have a clean starting point, but gradually something shifted. The fight started, not arguments, not discussions, not even mutual disagreements, one-sided fights where Daniel's father would yell, scold, unleash a never-ending barrage of rage at Daniel's mother. In front of the kids, always in front of the kids, Daniel's mother wouldn't yell back. She couldn't, because this wasn't a fight, it was an assault. A verbal assault that Daniel and his sister had to witness over and over and over. The funny, charming man who everybody loved was transforming into someone with controlling and short-temper behaviors. But here's what makes this so insidious. Daniel's father still believed he was the hero of the story. He would tell Daniel and his sister, "I'm trying to hold this family together. If it wasn't for me, you and your sister would be living with my divorced wife, struggling. My divorced wife, not your mother, not the woman I married. My divorced wife," as if he'd already emotionally divorced her while still forcing her to stay. As if she was just a burden he was nobly carrying instead of a person he'd vowed to love and cherish. Daniel and his sister eventually got brave enough to say it out loud. They told their father, "We would prefer it that way. We would rather you were divorced. We would rather live with Mom, struggling, than continue living under your controlling and short-temper behaviors." Think about that for a moment. These kids were so desperate, so exhausted, so done with the abuse that they explicitly said, "Please leave, please go. Life would be better without you here. That's not something children say lightly. That's not teenage rebellion or temporary anger. That's a plea for relief from ongoing trauma. And how did their father respond? He cried, and he threatened to self-harm. Let me be absolutely clear about what this is. This is emotional terrorism. This is manipulation at its most cruel. He spent years making everyone's life miserable. And when his children finally said, "We can't take this anymore," he made himself the victim, made them responsible for his well-being, put the burden of his life on their shoulders. "If you keep saying you want me gone, I'll hurt myself, and it'll be your fault." That's what he communicated, maybe not in those exact words, but that's the message. Daniel says, "This is the man I cried begging him to stay. Now he is just a guy I'm always running from." From daddy to someone you hide from, someone whose presence fills you with dread instead of joy. The abuse wasn't confined to their home. Daniel's father started acting out publicly in ways that were humiliating and degrading. Daniel gives a specific example. His father gets drunk and wants to pee in the bushes, in front of Walmart, in public, where anyone can see, and no one can stop him. If anyone tries, he fights them, yells, makes a scene. This is a 53-year-old man who everybody loved when Daniel was a kid, and now he's publicly urinating outside retail stores while drunk. But here's where it gets even more twisted. The drinking isn't just recreational, it's constant, it's demanding. It's weaponized. Daniel is 23. He's studying, trying to build a future, trying to escape the chaos of his home by focusing on education. And his father yells at him across the house because Daniel is studying too long and unable to buy him beers. Daniel's father is literally screaming at his son for prioritizing education over buying alcohol for his abusive father. Let that sink in. Daniel's crime is studying too much, focusing too hard on building a life, not being available enough to enable his father's addiction. Daniel asks his mother the obvious question, what changed him? Because surely the man who was funny and charming and beloved didn't just spontaneously transform into an abusive, alcoholic tyrant. Something must have happened. His mother tells him his father's businesses failed. They're struggling financially. It's the stress. And okay, financial stress is real. Business failure is devastating. I'm not minimizing that. But here's what Daniel's father did with that failure. Instead of creating a better business plan, he drinks. Instead of seeking help or advice, he keeps investing in cash-grab businesses. He spent all of his wife's savings, all of it, gone, and he's gotten them into deep debt, not small debt, deep debt. His response to business failure isn't to learn, adapt, or seek stability. It's to gamble with his family's financial security while self-medicating with alcohol. Daniel's mother has watched her savings, money she earned, money she saved, money that represented her security, disappear into her husband's failed ventures. And what does she get for it? Abuse, assault, a husband who screams at her in front of their children while spending every penny she has. Let's talk about what Daniel is witnessing in his home. His father is abusive and assaults his mother. Those are Daniel's words, not argues with, not fights with. Assaults, physical abuse is happening. In front of the children, Daniel's sister tries to intervene, tries to stop the fight, to protect their mother, and their father screams at her for it, yells at his daughter for trying to prevent him from hurting her mother. This is textbook abuser behavior. Escalating violence, public humiliation, the Walmart incident, financial abuse, spending all her money, emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm, isolation tactics, controlling behavior that makes everyone want to leave, blaming the victims. You're making me do this. I'm holding this family together, Daniel says. All the efforts of him trying to make money to support us, he evened it out with such behaviors. Even if we give his father credit for trying to provide financially, which is complicated given that he's actively destroying their finances, it doesn't matter. You can't even out abuse with a paycheck. You can't balance assault with providing shelter. That's not how this works. Yes, he beats your mother and threatens self-harm and publicly humiliates the family and steals all our savings, but he tries to make money so it's equal. No, it's not equal. It will never be equal. Daniel's mother tells him, "You shouldn't hold grudges against him." And I want to be gentle here because Daniel's mother is a victim too. She's being assaulted. Her savings are gone. She's trapped with an abusive alcoholic who's financially destroyed her. But this advice, don't hold grudges, is exactly the kind of thing abuse victims tell themselves to survive. If I can just be more understanding, if I can just not hold grudges, if I can just give him another chance, then maybe it'll get better. It's a coping mechanism, a survival strategy, because acknowledging the full horror of your situation when you feel trapped is sometimes more than a person can bear. But for Daniel, his mother's advice creates an impossible bind. His mother is telling him to forgive while she's actively being assaulted. She's telling him not to hold grudges while his father threatens self-harm if they express wanting to leave. She's telling him to show grace to a man who screams at him for studying instead of buying beer. Daniel says, "How?" And it's the most heartbreaking question in his entire story. How do you not hold grudges against someone who's destroying your family? How do you forgive ongoing abuse? How do you let go of anger when the harm is still happening every single day? Daniel says, "I want to run away, but I love my mom. I can't leave her with that guy I used to call him Daddy." He's 23 years old, legally an adult. He could leave, he could escape, but he won't, because his mother is still there, still trapped with his father, and Daniel can't abandon her. So Daniel stays in the chaos, in the abuse, in the environment that's destroying his mental health and his memories of his childhood. He stays because leaving means abandoning his mother to face his father alone. This is the final cruelty of family abuse. It traps the protective members along with the primary victim. Daniel isn't staying because he wants to. He's staying because his conscience won't let him leave his mother behind. He's sacrificing his own well-being to provide some buffer between his father and his mother, some witness, some support. At 23, Daniel should be building his life, pursuing his education, discovering who he is. Instead, he's trapped in a home where he's afraid of his own father, where he witnesses assault, where he's screamed at for studying too long. Daniel's title says it all. "I'm so broken knowing who my father was and who he becomes." This is ambiguous loss. It's grieving someone who's still alive. The father Daniel loved, Daddy, is gone. That funny, charming man who Daniel cried for when he left for work. He doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never existed. Maybe the stress of business failure just revealed who he always was underneath. Or maybe something genuinely broke in him and the man he was is truly dead. Either way, Daniel has lost his father, but he can't grieve properly because his father is still there, still present, still causing harm. You can't have closure. You can't have a funeral. You can't memorialize the good times without feeling like you're betraying your current reality. Daniel tracks the progression in his final line. From daddy to dad to father to just a guy. Daddy, the beloved hero of his childhood, the man he cried for. Dad, still familiar but growing distant. The fights are starting. Father, formal, cold. The relationship is dying. Just a guy, a stranger who lives in your house. Someone you used to know. Someone you're running from. That progression is heartbreaking because each step represents another piece of Daniel's heart breaking. Another part of his childhood dying. Another loss he has to process while still living with the person causing the loss. The truth Daniel needs to hear. Daniel, if you're hearing this, I need you to understand some things. You are not responsible for your father. When he threatens self-harm, if you say you want him gone, that's manipulation. His mental health is not your burden to carry. If he's genuinely suicidal, he needs professional help, not hostages. You cannot fix this. Your father's business failures, his alcoholism, his abusive behavior, none of it is yours to fix. You're his son, not his therapist, not his business partner, not his emotional support animal. Staying is not betraying yourself. You're staying to protect your mother. That's love, that's sacrifice, that's noble. But please understand, you cannot protect her from him indefinitely. He's stronger than you. He's more violent than you. And if he escalates, you could get hurt too. Your mother's advice comes from trauma. When she tells you not to hold grudges, she's not giving you wisdom. She's repeating what abuse victims tell themselves to survive. She can't see a way out, so she's trying to make the situation bearable. That doesn't mean you have to follow that advice. Grief for who he was is valid. You're allowed to mourn Daddy while fearing just a guy. Those feelings can coexist. You can miss who he was while acknowledging who he is now. You can cry for the father you lost even though he's still physically present. You need an escape plan, not just for you, for your mother and sister too. Contact domestic violence resources, learn about options, build a safety plan, because this situation is escalating and escalating abuse becomes dangerous. Let me be very clear about what Daniel is describing. This is domestic violence, physical assault of his mother, emotional terrorism through self-harm threats, financial abuse through spending all her savings, verbal abuse of the children. This isn't a difficult family situation. This isn't stress from business failure manifesting as short temper. This is abuse. Full stop. And Daniel's father has created a system where everyone is trapped. The mother stays because she's financially dependent and probably fears what he'll do if she leaves. Daniel stays because he can't abandon his mother. The sister is presumably in a similar position, and the father gets to continue his behavior with no real consequences. The self-harm threats are particularly insidious because they flip the script. Instead of the family being victims of his abuse, suddenly he's the victim of their desire to leave. He makes them responsible for his well-being while taking zero responsibility for theirs. Daniel asks, "How? How do I not hold grudges?" And I want to answer him honestly. You don't, you can't, and you shouldn't. Holding someone accountable for ongoing harm isn't a grudge. It's reality. It's self-preservation. It's mental health. A grudge is holding onto anger about something that's over. Something in the past. Something resolved. This isn't over. This isn't past. This isn't resolved. Your father is actively harming your family right now, today. Protecting yourself emotionally from that harm isn't holding a grudge, it's survival. You can acknowledge that Daddy was real, that the funny, charming man existed, that you loved him and he was worthy of that love. And you can simultaneously acknowledge that just a guy is who exists now, that he's abusive, alcoholic, and dangerous. That you're afraid of him and that fear is justified. Both things can be true. You're not betraying Daddy by protecting yourself from just a guy. You're not being disloyal to your childhood by refusing to enable your present. So I want to say this to anyone watching who relates to Daniel's story. If you're watching your parent transform from someone you loved into someone you fear, you're not alone. If you're trapped in a home with abuse because you can't leave someone you love behind, you're not weak. If you're grieving someone who's still alive, your grief is real and valid. And if someone tells you to not hold grudges while the harm is ongoing, you have permission to ignore that advice. Daniel, you loved Daddy, past tense. That love was real, but you don't have to love just a guy. Present tense, you don't owe him that. Mourn the father you lost. Protect yourself from the man who remains. And when you can, help your mother escape too, because nobody deserves to live like this. Not you, not your sister, and not your mother. The man you cried for is gone, and you're allowed to grieve that loss while protecting yourself from who he became. Story 3, the father who saved his son with brutal honesty. You turn into a wet bag of shit. You just got dumped. Over text. After 3 years, after verbal abuse, emotional manipulation, and stress migraines that nearly broke you. You're heading to the bar to numb the pain, maybe take someone home, maybe feel something other than this hollow relief. And then your father, your quiet, soft-spoken father who barely ever talks, puts his hand on your shoulder and says 8 words that will change your entire life. You turn into a wet bag of shit. Not "I'm sorry, son." Not her loss. Not the comfort you expected. The truth. Raw, brutal, necessary truth. This is the story of a man who spent 3 years losing himself in a toxic relationship, who got dumped via text and thought a one-night stand would fix it, and whose father loved him enough to tell him the one thing he desperately needed to hear: even if it hurt like hell. Our storyteller, let's call him Marcus, was in his 20s. That age where you think you know everything, where you think love conquers all, where you think if you just try hard enough, you can fix someone. Marcus had been with his fiancée for 3 years. 3 long years, he says. And he swears that relationship aged him, not the good kind of aging, not the maturity that comes from building something meaningful. The kind of aging that comes from stress, from carrying someone else's weight, from absorbing abuse and calling it love. Marcus thought he could fix her, carry her, save her. And he believed, genuinely believed, that enduring her verbal and emotional abuse was his duty. That's what you do when you love someone, right? You take it, you absorb it, you make yourself smaller so they can stay broken. The relationship was stuck in limbo. She said she wanted to work things out. Those magic words that keep you hoping, keep you trying, keep you trapped. One afternoon while Marcus was at work, his fiancée showed up at their apartment. She said she was grabbing a few things. Instead, she hauled out every last piece of her life. Everything, furniture, clothes, personal items. And then, and this is where it gets almost darkly funny, she took the bed. Not her bed. Not a bed she brought into the relationship, the bed from their shared apartment, the one they presumably shared. She left Marcus with a ragged old chair and what he describes perfectly as a quiet kind of humiliation. At least she didn't touch anything that was truly his. Small mercies. But let's pause here, because this moment reveals everything about the power dynamic in that relationship. She didn't discuss this with him, didn't negotiate, didn't even have the basic respect to say, I'm moving out, let's figure out who gets what. She just showed up while he was at work, when he couldn't stop her, couldn't object, couldn't even witness his own abandonment, and took everything, including the dignity of getting to process this on his own terms. A week later, Marcus is visiting his alma mater, maybe trying to reconnect with happier times. Maybe just getting away from that ragged chair and the ghost of a relationship. And that's when she officially ends it. Not in person, not with a phone call, not even with the minimal respect of real-time communication, over text. 3 years, an engagement, a shared life, all ended with typed words on a screen. And here's the kicker, in that text she calls Marcus a coward for not ending it first. She moved out while he was at work. She took the bed. She broke up via text. And somehow he's the coward. Marcus admits something crucial here. I'd been waiting for that moment. After everything, the fights, the threats, the stress, migraines, the days of cold silence, he wanted her to be the one to finally break it off. He says, if that makes me a coward, then fine, I was too worn down to care. That's not cowardice. That's exhaustion. That's what happens when someone drains you so completely that you don't even have the energy to save yourself. He was waiting for permission to be released, waiting for her to free him from a prison he couldn't figure out how to escape on his own. That night, Marcus has plans. His best friend just got out of his own breakup. They're going to the bar together, going to drown the sting. Classic post-breakup strategy, alcohol, commiseration, maybe some questionable decisions. Before heading out, Marcus jokes to his dad that maybe he'll get lucky and take someone home. Maybe a one-night stand would numb things for a minute, make him feel wanted, make him forget. His dad doesn't laugh, doesn't play along, doesn't let Marcus walk out that door with that plan. Instead, he puts a hand on Marcus's shoulder and says, "Son, wait." Marcus takes a moment to describe his father. And this context is crucial to understanding why what happens next matters so much. His dad is quiet, soft-spoken. The kind of man who doesn't talk unless he has something worth saying. Not domineering, not lecture-prone, not the type to offer unsolicited advice or run his mouth just to hear himself talk. When Marcus's father speaks, it means something. It carries weight. And right now, with his hand on his son's shoulder, he speaks. He looks Marcus dead in the eye and says, "I need you to hear me when I tell you this. You're the strongest man I've ever met, and I love you." A compliment, an affirmation. The kind of thing a son needs to hear, especially after being called a coward by the woman he spent 3 years trying to save. And then comes the sledgehammer. But every time you get involved with a woman, you turn into a wet bag of shit. Let's sit with that phrase for a moment. A wet bag of shit. Not you lose yourself a little. Not you compromise too much. Not some gentle, therapeutic language that softens the blow. A wet bag of shit. Formless, worthless, something you throw away. Something nobody wants to touch. That's what Marcus becomes when he gets involved with women. His father continues, "Before you even think about getting involved with anyone again, you need to get yourself straight. Not take some time. Not focus on yourself for a bit. Get yourself straight. Fix what's broken. Address what's wrong. Don't just heal from this relationship. Fix the pattern that led you here." And then his father says the most powerful thing of all, "I don't want you to say anything. I just need you to think about that." He's not asking for a response, not inviting an argument, not starting a conversation. He's delivering truth and walking away, trusting his son to sit with it, process it, accept it. Marcus sees the look on his father's face, and he understands. As much as it probably killed him to hit me with something that blunt in a moment that raw, he knew he had to. This wasn't cruelty. This was love. The hardest kind of love, the kind that tells you what you need to hear instead of what you want to hear. Marcus's immediate reaction, rage. Every nerve in me wanted to snap back, to yell, to defend myself. My blood was boiling. Of course it was. He just got dumped. He's raw, vulnerable, and his father just called him a wet bag of shit. Every instinct screams to fight back, to defend, to reject this assessment. But Marcus doesn't say a word. He leaves, goes to the bar with his friend. But he doesn't drink much that night. Why? Because deep down I knew the son of a bitch was right. That's the moment. That's when the truth lands. Marcus's father didn't deliver that line hoping Marcus would agree in the moment. He delivered it knowing Marcus would fight it initially, but eventually, when the adrenaline faded and the honesty could sink in, Marcus would recognize the truth. And Marcus did. What was Marcus's father seeing that Marcus couldn't see? A pattern, a cycle. A way Marcus transformed every single time he got involved with a woman. Marcus was strong. His father said it, "You're the strongest man I've ever met." But that strength disappeared the moment a woman entered his life. Why? Because Marcus didn't know who he was outside of being needed, outside of fixing someone, outside of earning love through sacrifice. He thought love meant carrying someone else's weight, absorbing their abuse, making himself smaller so they could stay broken. He thought being a good partner meant losing himself completely, dissolving his boundaries, accepting treatment he would never accept from anyone else. Every time Marcus got into a relationship, he stopped being Marcus. He became a version of himself that existed only to serve, please, fix, carry, endure. A wet bag of shit, something with no structure, no backbone, no form of its own. His father saw this pattern. Watched his strong, capable son transform into someone unrecognizable every time a woman came into his life. And he knew if Marcus went to that bar and took someone home, seeking validation, seeking distraction, seeking proof that someone wanted him, the cycle would start again. Marcus would find another woman who needed fixing, another relationship where he dissolved himself, another 3 years of aging beyond his years. His father loved him too much to let that happen. So Marcus spent the next 2 years rebuilding, not pretending to be strong, not performing strength for external validation, actually becoming strong. He focused on figuring out who he was without a woman to validate me. That line is everything, because Marcus finally understood he'd been using women as mirrors, as proof of his worth, as evidence that he mattered. If she needs me, I'm valuable. If she stays, I'm worthy. If I can fix her, I'm enough. But Marcus needed to be enough for himself first, so he lived. He took boxing classes, started lifting weights, ran Spartan races, worked at a haunted attraction, traveled. These aren't random activities. Each one represents something Marcus was building, boxing, learning to fight back, to defend himself, to hit as well as take hits. Weightlifting, building physical strength that mirrored the internal strength he was developing. Spartan races, proving to himself he could endure not someone else's abuse but legitimate challenges he chose for himself. Haunted attraction work, probably the most interesting choice. Taking a job where his role was to be powerful, intimidating, in control. the opposite of what he'd been in his relationship. Traveling, discovering who he was in new places, without the familiar patterns, without the history. For 2 years, Marcus did the hardest work there is. He built a self that didn't need external validation to exist. After 2 years, Marcus's career took him to a new city, a fresh start, a clean slate. And then when he was finally whole, finally steady, finally someone he actually liked, he met her. The woman who would become his wife, not when he was desperate, not when he was broken, not when he needed someone to validate his existence, when he was complete. When he had something to offer from fullness instead of neediness. Marcus says, "Funny how life works. Sometimes you need the truth delivered with a sledgehammer before the world sends you what you were always meant to hold on to." That's the difference. His ex-fiancée was someone he thought he could fix, carry, save, someone who drained him. His wife was someone he met when he was already whole, when he could build with someone instead of for someone. He didn't need her to complete him. He wanted her to complement him. That's the foundation of a healthy relationship. Let's talk about why Marcus's father's intervention worked when so many well-meaning attempts fail. Timing. He didn't wait for a calm moment. He didn't schedule a sit-down talk. He caught Marcus right before he was about to make a decision that would restart the cycle. Intervention at the point of action. Honesty. He didn't soften the message, didn't use therapeutic language. Didn't worry about hurting Marcus's feelings in the moment. He prioritized truth over comfort. Love first, before the hard truth, he affirmed Marcus. "You're the strongest man I've ever met, and I love you." This wasn't an attack. This was love delivering difficult truth. No debate, "I don't want you to say anything." He didn't invite argument, didn't ask Marcus to agree. Just planted the seed and trusted it would grow. Personal cost. Marcus understood it probably killed him to hit me with something that blunt in a moment that raw. His father sacrificed comfort for his son's well-being. That's love. Pattern identification. He didn't just critique the ex-fiancée. He identified the pattern. Every time you get involved with a woman, this wasn't about one bad relationship. This was about Marcus's approach to all relationships. Action requirement. You need to get yourself straight wasn't a suggestion. It was a requirement. Don't date again until you fix this. Period. The lesson for everyone this story isn't just about Marcus. It's about anyone who loses themselves in relationships. Anyone who thinks love means enduring abuse. Anyone who believes their value comes from being needed. Anyone who dissolves their boundaries to keep someone else comfortable. Anyone who spends years carrying someone else's weight and calling it loyalty. Marcus's father gave him permission to stop. To step back, to rebuild. And sometimes that's what we all need, someone who loves us enough to tell us the brutal truth, not the comfortable lie that we're fine and just need to find the right person. The hard truth that we're not fine, that we have patterns to break, that we need to get ourselves straight before we can build something healthy with someone else. Marcus ends his story by acknowledging what his father's words gave him, 2 years of growth, a chance to become someone he actually liked. And eventually a wife, a real partner, not a project. He calls his father's truth a sledgehammer. And it was, but sometimes you need a sledgehammer to break through walls you've built around yourself, walls that keep you trapped in patterns that destroy you. Marcus's father saw his son heading toward another version of the same pain, and he loved him enough to stop him. "You turn into a wet bag of shit." 8 words that probably hurt worse than the breakup text. 8 words that saved Marcus's life. So I want to ask you, do you have someone in your life who will tell you the hard truth? Someone who loves you enough to risk hurting your feelings if it means saving your future? Someone who will call you out on your patterns instead of comforting you through their consequences? And if you are that person for someone else, do you have the courage to speak the truth when it matters most? Marcus's father could have said, "Sorry about the breakup, have fun tonight, be safe." He could have let Marcus go to that bar and start the cycle over again. But he didn't, because he loved his son more than he valued comfort. And if you're currently in a relationship where you're turning into a wet bag of shit, losing yourself, accepting abuse, dissolving your boundaries, maybe this is your sledgehammer moment. Maybe you need to hear what Marcus needed to hear. Get yourself straight before you get involved with anyone again, before you lose yourself one more time, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to deserve better. Let me know in the comments, have you ever gotten harsh truth that changed your life? Or are you currently losing yourself in a relationship and need permission to step back and rebuild? This community sees you, and sometimes we all need someone to love us enough to tell us what we don't want to hear. Story 4, the slap he brushed off. How one moment of violence led to 17 years of silence. 16 years ago, during an argument, your wife slaps you across the face. It doesn't physically hurt. What hurts is the shock, the violation, the realization that the person you love just hit you, but you brush it off. Because you've seen it 1,000 times in movies, women slapping men is just drama, right? Everyone moves on, so you move on too, except you don't. Not really. Because what follows that slap isn't healing. It's 17 years of silence, 17 years of swallowing your feelings, 17 years of consoling her about the violence she committed against you. Until one day you wake up and realize you've been erased from your own marriage. This is the story of a man who forgave too easily, absorbed too much, and finally, after nearly 2 decades, is serving divorce papers, not because he stopped loving her, but because he finally started loving himself. Our storyteller, let's call him David, takes us back 16 or 17 years. He and his wife were in their 20s, 2 young kids at home, exhausted, stressed, operating on no sleep and maximum pressure. During an argument, his wife slapped him. David is careful with his language here. It was the only time it ever happened. One slap, not a pattern of physical abuse, not repeated violence, one moment. It did not physically hurt me, David says. What hit harder was the shock of it. The shock. Because the person you chose to build a life with just crossed a line, just used physical violence to express anger, just treated your body as something they had a right to strike. But David didn't process it that way. Not then. He brushed it off. And he explains exactly why. I grew up watching movies and shows where a woman slapping a man was treated like some dramatic moment everyone just brushed off. So I brushed it off too. This is crucial. David had been culturally conditioned to believe that women hitting men doesn't count. It's comedy, it's drama, it's just what happens when emotions run high. The man takes it and moves on. So David moved on. He told himself it was nothing. They were young, tired, stressed. His wife had postpartum depression. Of course she was overwhelmed. Of course things boiled over. David says, I never even considered questioning it. The slap itself wasn't the problem. The problem was what David did next. He gave himself no permission to have a reaction to it. But here's where the real damage began. Not in the moment of the slap, but in every moment after. David tried bringing it up multiple times, because even though he'd told himself it was nothing, something in him knew it wasn't nothing. And every time he brought it up, his wife cried, not just tears. Deep crying, David says. So David, the person who was slapped, the victim of physical violence, ended up consoling her. The person who hit him, every single time, David says, somehow I became responsible for her emotions about something that happened to me. Read that again. Because this is the architecture of how abuse gets normalized in relationships. The victim becomes responsible for managing the abuser's feelings about the abuse. David brought up being slapped, right arrow. His wife cried, right arrow. David comforted her, right arrow. The conversation ended without David's feelings being addressed, right arrow. Repeat. And because David loved her, he kept taking that on, kept absorbing her guilt, kept prioritizing her emotional state over his own need to be heard. David started building a framework of explanations, not for himself, for her. First, it was postpartum. She was struggling with postpartum depression. Of course, she wasn't herself. Of course, things were hard. He needed to be patient. Then it was overstimulation, too much noise, too many demands, too little sleep. She was overwhelmed. He needed to be understanding. Later, it was premenopause, hormones shifting, mood changes, physical changes. She was going through something difficult. He needed to be supportive. Eventually, menopause, another hormonal transition, more emotional volatility, more reasons he needed to be quiet. David says, every stage had a new explanation, and with every explanation I convinced myself I had to be more patient, more understanding, more quiet. Notice the progression, more patient, more understanding, more quiet, not we're working through this together. Not she's getting help and I'm supporting that process. Just be more quiet, absorb more, speak less. David says, what I never did was give myself any empathy. For 17 years, David had empathy for everyone except himself. He understood her postpartum, her overstimulation, her premenopause, her menopause, but he never asked, what about me? What about what I'm carrying? What about the moment I was hit and never allowed to process it? David describes something painfully precise. I think the frustration built quietly because I could never figure out when I was allowed to be upset or allowed to have my own reaction. He couldn't have feelings because her feelings always took precedence. If David voiced anything, hurt, frustration, exhaustion, resentment, it would immediately get linked to whatever phase she was in. Not you're right, that was unfair to you. Not I'm sorry I haven't made space for your feelings. Just, this is because of my postpartum / overstimulation / premenopause / menopause. David's feelings became satellites to her condition. They didn't exist independently. They only mattered in relation to what she was going through, and if David pushed too hard, things would explode around the kids. So David stayed silent. He kept absorbing it all, because expressing his own needs might destabilize her, and destabilizing her might hurt the kids. So David made himself small, made himself quiet, made himself disappear. David admits something that takes tremendous courage. I hate that it changed the way I look at things. I hate that it made me more numb toward people dealing with depression or anxiety or postpartum issues. He knows those things are real. He knows they're serious. He's not denying the validity of mental health struggles. But for 17 years, those struggles were used as reasons David had to swallow his own feelings. They became tools to silence him, explanations for why his experience didn't matter, and that slowly shut something off in him. This is what happens when legitimate struggles are weaponized, even unintentionally. When I'm dealing with depression becomes, therefore you can't express hurt. When I have anxiety becomes, therefore you must absorb everything silently. David developed compassion fatigue, not because he's heartless, but because his empathy was exploited for nearly 2 decades until he had nothing left. David never gave ultimatums. Everything he read said ultimatums were bad for relationships. And honestly, he was scared that if he said, I cannot do this anymore, she might spiral, and the kids were too young to handle that. So David kept the peace. What did keeping the peace look like? He worked. He cooked every meal for 17 years, every meal for 17 years. He handled the house. He managed most of the bills. His wife contributed. David acknowledges that, but he estimates it was about 25% to his 75%. David is careful here. That's my side of the story. She should have hers, and that's okay. Even now, even while recognizing the imbalance, David is being fair, acknowledging that perspectives differ, that his experience isn't the only truth, but the labor imbalance is real. And David told himself, that is what love is, that is what partnership is. Except it wasn't partnership. Partnership implies mutual contribution, mutual support, mutual burden sharing. This was David carrying most of the weight while being told he couldn't complain because his wife was struggling with insert current hormonal phase. David says something incredibly insightful. In a strange way, I do think she appreciates me. I think she knows I put up with a lot and helped her through things. But appreciation is not the same as actually fitting together in the long run. His wife probably does appreciate him. She probably knows he's been patient, supportive, self-sacrificing. But appreciation doesn't create compatibility. You can appreciate someone's efforts while still being fundamentally mismatched. You can be grateful for what someone did while acknowledging the relationship doesn't work. David carried this marriage for 17 years. And maybe his wife appreciated that. Maybe she even loved him for it. But somewhere along the way, David disappeared. The person he was, the person with needs and feelings and boundaries, got buried under layers of accommodation. And you can't have a real relationship with someone who no longer exists. Now that the kids are older, I finally see the dynamic for what it is. For 17 years, David couldn't see clearly, because seeing clearly meant acknowledging that his marriage was fundamentally broken, and acknowledging that meant potentially destabilizing his family. So David couldn't afford clarity. He needed the illusions, the explanations, the justifications, but the kids are older now. The fear of destabilizing them has lessened, and suddenly David can see what he's been living. I do not see myself living the rest of my life like this. I do not see myself always being the one who has to swallow everything so the other person can avoid feeling uncomfortable or guilty. This is the awakening. The moment David realizes, this is the rest of my life if I don't change it. Decades more of being silent, of managing her emotions, of cooking every meal and handling the house and absorbing her guilt and never ever expressing his own needs. That's the future if David stays. And David finally understands he can't do it. David says, maybe the slap itself was not the whole story. Maybe the bigger story is everything I absorbed afterward, everything I never said, everything I excused. This is profound self-awareness. The slap was a violation. It was wrong. It should never have happened. But the real damage wasn't the physical act. It was the 17 years of being told, implicitly and explicitly, that David's reaction to it didn't matter. The real abuse was the pattern that followed. David tries to express hurt, right arrow, wife cries, right arrow, David consoles her, right arrow, David's hurt remains unaddressed. Repeat for 17 years, the real tragedy was David learning that love meant silence. That partnership meant absorption. That being a good husband meant erasing himself. The slap was a moment. The aftermath was a lifetime. My lawyer is serving her next week. After 17 years of marriage, David is getting divorced. I do not feel happy about it. I do not feel victorious. I just feel like I am finally listening to the part of myself that never got space in this marriage. There's no anger in David's words, no bitterness, no desire for revenge, just exhaustion, and finally, self-preservation. David isn't leaving because he hates his wife. He's leaving because he loves himself enough to stop disappearing. He's leaving because he finally understands that he deserves to have feelings, to express needs, to exist as a full person instead of an emotional support system for someone else. David's story reveals something our culture desperately needs to acknowledge. Male victims of domestic violence are dismissed, mocked, and blamed. When a woman slaps a man in movies, it's drama, it's comedy, it's deserved. The man must have done something to earn it. When a man tries to talk about being hit by a woman, he's told, "It couldn't have hurt that bad. What did you do to make her that angry?" Man up. You're bigger than her, it doesn't count. David internalized all of this. He brushed off the slap not because it didn't affect him, but because society told him it shouldn't affect him. And then for 17 years, every time he tried to process it, he ended up comforting his abuser. This is what happens when we don't take male victimhood seriously, when we treat women's violence as less harmful because women are generally physically smaller. Violence isn't just about physical damage. It's about violation, betrayal, the destruction of safety in a relationship. David's wife crossed a line, and David never got to fully acknowledge that because he was too busy managing her feelings about it. If there's one thing David's story teaches, it's this: you cannot love someone well if you don't love yourself at all. David spent 17 years having empathy for his wife, understanding her struggles, accommodating her needs, explaining away her behavior. And he gave himself none of that. He never asked, "What do I need right now?" He never said, "My feelings matter too." He never demanded, "You hurt me and I need you to acknowledge that," without making it about your guilt. David thought self-sacrifice was love. That's what he'd been taught. That's what culture told him. Be patient, be understanding, be quiet. But self-sacrifice without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. And you can't build a healthy relationship when one person doesn't exist anymore. David ends his post by saying, "I just feel like I am finally listening to the part of myself that never got space in this marriage." That part of David has been waiting 17 years, waiting to be heard, waiting to be valued, waiting to matter. And now, finally, David is listening, not with happiness, not with victory, just with quiet recognition that he deserves to take up space, that his feelings matter, that he doesn't have to absorb everyone else's emotions at the expense of his own. The lawyer is serving papers next week, and David isn't celebrating, he's just breathing. Finally. So I want to ask you, have you ever brushed off something that hurt you because you thought you were supposed to? Have you ever spent years managing someone else's guilt about the harm they caused you? Have you ever found yourself consoling the person who hurt you instead of being comforted yourself? Have you ever become so numb from absorbing other people's struggles that you lost your own capacity for empathy? If you answered yes to any of these questions, David's story is for you. You're allowed to have feelings about what happened to you, even if the other person was struggling. You're allowed to need space for your own emotions, even if expressing them makes someone else uncomfortable. You're allowed to stop carrying the relationship alone, even if the other person appreciates what you've done. And you're allowed to leave, even if you still love them. Because love without space for yourself isn't love, it's disappearance, and you deserve to exist. Let me know in the comments, have you ever stayed silent about something that hurt you to keep the peace? How long did you stay silent? And what finally made you speak up or leave? This community sees you, and your feelings matter, even especially the ones you've been taught to brush off. Thanks for watching.